and combine the code regulations with the code. And so Ms. Tucker and I met, and we reviewed the code and the code of regulations and developed some draft language. So, other than combining the code and the code of regulations, I think two of the key changes would be to increase the term of the ombudsman from 2 years to 4 years. The United States Ombudsman Association recommends a 4 or 5 year term. We're one of the few ombudsman's offices in the country that has a 2-year term. And personally, I would not care if the Assembly mandated that this wouldn't apply to me, but it would apply to the next ombudsman, because for me, this is about the future of the office, and I think it would be easier for the Assembly to recruit a good candidate in the future if you have a 4-year term versus a 2-year term. The state of Alaska ombudsman has a 5-year term. The other major change or noticeable change is for grievances against the ombudsman, currently there is no time frame. So somebody under the current municipal code of regulations can come to the ombudsman's office 3 years after their case was closed and file a grievance against the ombudsman. So we recommended putting a timeline in there, and I believe it's 45 days from the time the case is declined or closed. And other than that, I don't think there are really any major changes to it.
Do you have any changes in the Ombudsman's office you've identified?
It does recognize on page 7, 14, the associate ombudsman. It also, as Darryl has pointed out, in reviewing the regulations which are attached at the back that will be repealed by this, and combining them with the code. One of the things that both the Ombudsman's office and recently in their draft review, the ethics board, is that there really is a need to codify and clarify when the Ombudsman can defer or decline jurisdiction. And so one of the big reforms that this does is beginning on page 12, you have a new section, and although it's adapted from the regulations, it tries to make those regulations clearer so that if there are, and it's divided between when the ombudsman may decline review and when the ombudsman shall decline review. And so just an example can be that there is another forum that's much better suited in the ombudsman's offices with its limited resources to looking at something, so it can send it that way. And that's not necessarily different from what it does now. It's just that it wasn't as clear before.
We've been adding, is anybody online?
I think Dean Gates is listening online.
I heard the phone, so I was
Yes.
Thank you. Anything else, Julie, Brad?
Oh, yes, I'm here online.
Thank you, Dean.
And also, on page 5, under definitions, we brought the definition of a record into the 21st century. So I actually pulled this language. There's a jurisdiction in Arizona that's working on creating an ombudsman's office, and they sent me their draft code to review, and their definition of record was, I thought, really good. So I pulled it out of there, and Ms. Tucker and I inserted it into the
Question from the Assembly members. Floor, sir.
I'm sorry, Darryl, I read this last week. I'm trying to find about your subpoena power. Is that, I remember it was in the new language. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find where it is exactly.
The ombudsman has had subpoena power for the 40 years that the office has existed, so it's not new.
Good. That was the question I was going to ask, because that's a tremendous power. And I'm glad that if you had it, then great. Thanks for not abusing it. Is the new language an expansion in any way of that power?
No. The power to issue a subpoena is not changed or altered. That is also, the ability to subpoena is also recommended by the United States Ombudsman Association, so model ombudsman offices. I would say in 4.5 years I've never had to issue a subpoena. I had to use the threat of a subpoena once to get some cooperation, and that's been the only time I've had to even consider it.
Are there any, again, I apologize, I can't find where it is. Are there any left and right limits on that subpoena power? Are you allowed to, are there certain people you're allowed to subpoena and certain who aren't, or is it sort of broad?
I would say I can subpoena records and individuals that I would have jurisdiction over.
But you don't have the jurisdiction of elected officials.
No.
That's the only one area. So if you're asking, can he subpoena the same members of the mayor? No.
And I would say in 4.5 years, I got to tell you, the cooperation from municipal departments and employees has been incredible. As a matter of fact, I would say 40% of our referrals anymore people are referred to us by the departments. So we've worked hard in the last 4.5 years to improve our relationship with the departments and to earn their respect so that they will refer constituents to us.
So you don't have subpoena power over state agencies then? It's
No.
just thanks.
Mr. Wilson, sir.
You know, on page 12, under this decline of jurisdiction, you've got, you may decline if the complaint relates to an action which the complainant has known about for more than a year. So if their neighbor's doing it wrong, and finally after a year, it's just pushed them over the edge and they call you, you can say, I've known about it before. In reference to an action.
Well, that also isn't new. And the reason that's in there, we look at that on a case-by-case basis, and I've actually taken complaints that regard issues, land use issues in Eagle River that were 40 years old, or some issues that are 20 years old. But in some situations, if a year has elapsed, you may not be able to get the records, you may not be able to contact witnesses, it may be virtually impossible to investigate a complaint that they've been aware of for a year or 2 or 3 years. And we will decline in those situations.
Okay, so kind of a discrete event from a year ago. You might go, I can't get it, but if it's been an ongoing thing that you knew about, but it continues, they have a booster.
Well, if it's something that we feel that we would have the ability and available witnesses or documents to look at, we would look at it. Otherwise, we would decline it. That's why the code says may instead of shall.
Anything else? Mr. Steele, sir.
That's my question. Thank you.
We have the ability now to talk to 2 ombudsmen. We have the ones currently and the one that was in there. Barbara, anything from your perspective, you're ombudsman at a critical time period. We had a real problem in the ombudsman's office. Anything else we need to add in here, or are you sufficient on this?
I think Daryl and Julia have done a great job. I think they have captured items that were issues for the year that I was in the Ombudsman's office, and I think they've done a good job.
I will say that Ms. Jones has started this project of combining the Code of Regulations and the ordinance, so I actually used her draft when I started looking at it, so I think we concurred on a lot of the opportunities for improvement.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to echo Mr. Tucker, Mr. Hess, Ms. Jones did a really fine job, and I had the opportunity to review this document before it was presented to the group. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Dunbar, sir.
I'm sorry to keep coming back to this subpoena power, but Ms. Tucker graciously pointed it out to me. It's on page 14. And I guess what caused my antennas to go up was just because the way it's written, it just says, the appearance and sworn testimony of a person whom the ombudsman reasonably believes may be able to give information. And I know you're saying that it's only people over whom you have jurisdiction municipal agency. But the way it's written here, it sounds like you have subpoena power over people, right? And I get it. I mean, it's couched in a section that says investigative powers. You can certainly infer that it is over people in municipal departments. But I was wondering if whether we think it's necessary not just to put clarifying language in there to make sure that it's.
Well, but we have jurisdiction not just over municipal departments and agencies and employees, we also have jurisdiction over agents of the municipality. So that would be a contractor who provides services to the public on behalf of the municipality.
So, would you object to language that says something like sworn testimony of a person over whom the ombudsman has jurisdiction, or something like that? Or, Barbara, you're an attorney as well. Do you have any thoughts on whether this needs clarification, or you think it's fine as it is?
Well, I think there's two things that I'd say. One is that I would argue that the power hasn't been abused, and if it had been abused, I think we might be having a different conversation. Daryl might be able to look in the records, but I don't recall that I ever saw a subpoena that had ever been issued in the office. But I would be concerned about limiting it. And it's for the reasons that Daryl said. Even though he might need information from a contractor, for example, or someone that had information from the contractor, I think you could end up quibbling with someone about whether or not there was jurisdiction over them. And I think that might be problematic. I think you might be better off fighting it out in court, because everybody can appeal to court on the subpoena power if there's an abuse. And I think somewhere else, the paragraph right above there, does it talk about the municipal attorney's office assisting the ombudsman? Oh.
It says shall not have access to legally privileged records.
But I think Daryl does have access to legal counsel, and I think he uses that. And that's what I would suggest, that is one of the controls, is that either assembly counsel or municipal legal counsel would be in a better place to advise him. I think you might be exceeding your authority on that subpoena. I think that might be a better way to do it than to limit it in the code. So that's just my thoughts.
Well, I don't think any ombudsman would request a subpoena without consulting legal advice.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Wilton?
I have a question that kind of sort of goes back to that decline of jurisdiction, but I just wanted a sense of the way these are presented. That whole section is new, is that correct? 2.60.125.
It's out of the Code of Regulations.
Beg your pardon, okay.
It's out of the Code of Regulations.
Which is Anchorage.
Anchorage Municipal Code of Regulations.
Oh, so are we just pulled it and stuck it into here?
It's
Which
attached
is
to the
attached.
back of your document.
Is it, so are we taking
So,
that or is it-
so as the note shows on the side, it's adapted from that, so it's not word for word. And so you can compare that yourself, because Barbara has included it in your regular assembly book, because it's mandatory that when you repeal something, that what you're repealing is attached. So the last 3 pages, I think, of the document that you have has that code of regulations. And so a couple of the sections that were combined include 260.002, some from 003 because it was spread out as investigations, conflicts of interest, I drew from, and then we, added language. So it's not 100% new, but the wording is new.
Okay. No, I just want to understand this. Okay.
Mr. Steele, anything?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, thank you. Mr. Jackson, anything? Mr. Croft?
Well, just general, I didn't even know we had regs until recently. Are there a lot of them left, or
Very few.
is there a plan to just get rid of it, or Was it really like regular regs, it was done by administration, not assembly act?
There's virtually no difference between the regulations and the code of these codified ordinances, and it really just causes confusion. Our setup is that the regulations cannot be effective until they're approved by the assembly, so there's very little reason for them to exist at all. So as a practical matter, we have been picking them up one by one and moving them into the code. The ultimate aim of hoping to get rid of them. I don't know that we're on a track to completely eliminate them, but we're doing it as we can.
Because it is kind of a trap. You can look at what you think is the whole code and then not realize you missed a reg. Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr.
That has
Chairman.
happened to us multiple times, Mr. Croft. People will say, well, that's not in your code, and we have to refer them to the code of regulations. So repealing our code of regulations, there will be no regs on the books for the assembly department.
Anything else, sir? Julia, anything for you?
No, did you want me to touch on the other two parts of the code? So the ombudsman's rewrite was the largest part of this, but there were some other housekeeping things that had been in the works from time to time and never brought to the assembly in a formal code, because we would start drafting it and we would think that there was going to be a master rewrite of Title II, and so we would delay it. And so this time because there were going to be a master rewrite of Title II, we captured some things outside of the clerk's office, and so the section 1 is the Assembly Program and Budget Analyst Office, and as you know, the Assembly has been served well here by Rose Foley, the budget analyst, and so this codifies codifies that position within the clerk's office. Assembly Counsel, since sometime shortly before my tenure, the Assembly Counsel position was actually listed under the clerk's office, and
That's not where I want it.
yeah, and so I think that was something that you, Mr. Trainee, Debbie Osiander, various chairs in the last 12 years have brought to my attention to do something about, and we have had this language drafted pretty much this way several times, and this time it's included in the ordinance. And so it doesn't change that, it just pulls the Assembly Counsel's office out, so it's not considered a division of the clerk's office, that's always made sense to me, because one, the Assembly Counsel's office has always had its own budget designation. Two is that the Assembly Counsel's office operates under a completely different mandate than the clerk's office. The clerk's office is open to the public, records are open, the Assembly Counsel's office is not open to the public, and the records are confidential and privileged. So this is pretty much word for word what would apply. Now it's just separate under its own section. And then the Municipal Audit Committee in code is at this time referenced just as the Audit Committee, and there were a couple of housekeeping and also in the last section 6 to make sure that it was clarified that the Audit Committee is going to review the management action taken to implement audit recommendations contained in all reports of audit at a meeting of the Municipal Audit Committee, and that's something that Chair Ray Jackson thought was important to make a clarification that has come up over time. So,
Questions
all I
from
got.
members? Any questions at all? Okay. Barbara, anything else from you, ma'am? No questions, we're going to end this meeting?
No.
Another ordinance.
Sorry. Which ordinance?
The referenda.
So thank you, Madam Chair. We're now looking at AO 2017-41, which picks up another section of Title II. referenda and recall. This was on our radar as early as last summer when we started reviewing several initiatives and a referendum that proposed to us that there was some nomenclature in the code now which is less crystalline and clear that it could be. And then it was really brought home to us in the spending limit lawsuit case, where, to our surprise, there were a lot of claims not just on the substance of whether the item should have been sent to voters because of constitutional requirements, but also procedural, what we call quibbles, about whether the clerk's office and municipal attorney's office had correctly processed the application. And what has now become clear to us is that the root of the confusion seems to be historical. When the Anchorage Municipal Charter was adopted in 1975, it set up the initiative referendum recall process and afforded citizens the right to bring a petition to the clerk's office. That petition was initially signed by thousands of people. There was no step, like there has been for a very long time in the Alaska statutes for the statewide initiative process, for someone to walk in with 12 signatures and say, I would like a petition. Please do the initial scrub to make sure this is even worth my time to circulate. That application step was added in 2002, I think I want to say, in an ordinance by Assembly Members Training and Keshi, which is actually a very useful additional process because you don't want 6,000 people to come in with a defective instrument and find out only after they have expended all this time and effort collecting signatures that they should never have started with that one to begin with. And that's happened in the past. In 1996, there was even one with the Supreme Court spiked, even though it had already been printed, ready to go with voters on the ballot. Suffice to say then, our main goals in AO 2017-41 are to make all of that process clearer and to more closely hew to what is in Title 15 for state applications for initiatives and referenda. I don't believe that there are particularly substantive changes other than we really do want to clarify that the initiative process and the referendum process afford to voters the opportunity to enact without assembly approval or involvement, or to repeal without assembly approval or involvement laws. So the thing that is there is what they get to control are the laws that they are proposing, and that the summary descriptions that go with those laws and will ultimately appear on the ballot have always been within the purview of the municipal clerk's office and the municipal attorney's office. And that has caused some confusion at the local level where folks have wanted to circulate petitions that characterize the thing that is theirs to create in a way which is going to cause them and the municipality trouble. So we've tried to make those lines clear.
Bill, so you said that this more closely hews to the state process for ballot initiatives. One of the important portions of the state level ballot initiative process is you have to get a certain percentage of the votes from a certain percentage of the districts, 3/4, I believe, of the different state house districts. Does our new code mirror that? And if not, is this the right place to do that, or is that a separate section of the code?
Through the chair, it does not. There are at least two major differences between the local process and the statewide process that would still be differences, even if they simply adopted this. One is exactly what you mentioned. There was a constitutional amendment, I think, that changes the way statewide initiatives run. We have to collect signatures from within various districts. We don't do that, it's all at large. Second, the state has a statute that regulates the qualifications of the signature gatherers. It says they have to be, I think, registered voters, and they can't be paid more than a certain amount of money. I think it's $3 a signature. We don't have anything that regulates the circulators or where you're getting the signatures from, other than you're getting them from the municipality at large. We're open to exploring things along those lines, but this was really designed to be in the nature of a cleanup. It could actually be a vehicle for addressing any of those things, but we didn't want to push that or smuggle that in here. I will also say that the biggest new piece of law that comes in this is on page 5, which is the code, once we added the application step, has never adequately described what an applicant is supposed to receive back from us if they get their application approved. It is always obliquely referred to this petition master form without describing really what it is. So we have tried to give that some substance.
Dunbar.
I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, this might be what you were about to mention, but I wanted to, just what you were just talking about. I know there's controversy with the fluoride folks on email signature gathering and that kind of thing. They were trying to press you, I think, to allow them to do some kind of email signatures. Is that resolved in this? Is there clarity in here that they have to do it in person or what have you?
I can answer that for you, Mr. Dunbar. I did want to touch on something that Mr. Balti said first, and that is the petition master form is one other big difference between us and the state, because I believe the state provides a booklet. And we do not do that. We provide one piece of paper, and that is the petition master form. And then the sponsors are responsible for reproducing that, making the copies. And we're asking you to leave that the same, because recently when the taxi cab petition came in, it's a full banker's box of materials, so that would be a lot of copies to make. So then to answer your question on the fluoride initiative, it is not resolved as the fluoride people will want it, because it says only unaltered forms of the petition may be used. And our position is that unaltered means the 8.5 by 14 or 8.5 by 11 form that it's on. And the reason it's on a large form like that is so that we can read it and that it contains all of the information. If the form is smaller, it means that we're not going to be able to read it. It's an administrative burden on the clerk's office that we don't believe is borne out by the need to email the petition. So we have not addressed that here.
Mr. Cross, sir.
Yeah, so having seen these work through the legislature, was in the legislature when they did some of these limitations, I'd urge us to be very careful with particularly substantive limitations of the people's right to do what is in effect a check on us. And so if any of those are considered, I'd urge them to be outside of this bill. This bill just does changes, and I would resist them. I think this is a place where we need to do a tremendously light hand, because it is the way people tell us they didn't like what we did, and so us limiting that is dangerous, at least. But I wanted to understand the two-step process here, like the state, is you make the initial determination as to whether this can be done by initiative, not its substantive constitutionality, right?
So through the chair, that's generally correct. In practice, this might be helpful for the state. In the state's process, the petitioners come in with a proposed bill. It really looks like a legislative act. It's being enacted by the people of Alaska. Hand that to the lieutenant governor, and the AG's office and the lieutenant governor then review that and assess whether that can go to voters. So that's the question. It's not generally whether it's lawful. It's whether it violates any of the provisions of the Alaska Constitution, or in our case, the charter or the code requirements that just throttle what can go to voters at all. So it might be an unconstitutional taking. It might violate equal protection. It might be 20 different ways illegal. But unless it is using the initiative process for an aim that is forbidden, make or repeal appropriations, to enact courts, to change jurisdiction of courts, etc., it goes to voters. Our pre-election review is very circumscribed. So that's the first answer to your question. The second answer to your question is the municipal process has been confused, because the clarity that the state has by saying, bring us the bill you want, has not really ever been realized at the local level, in part because we had this long historical practice of people circulating a petition that we never saw until it came in the door. So people had prepared not only the law that they wanted enacted, but the summary of the thing that they were trying to describe and the form of the petition that they had created. And so what walks in the door now, sometimes, is not just the law people want, but also some characterization of it, and often that characterization is not neutral and would get them in trouble and us in trouble if we sent that to the ballot. So what we're trying to more closely say is this is supposed to run like the state process. Just give us the law you want, on the books or off the books, and we we will help you put that into the petition that is lawful and most likely to survive any kind of procedural challenge.
Okay, so we're going to, good. I can see how that could be problematic, particularly where it comes with signatures, but even just coming as a bill with a characterization. So that's the first step on page 3, certification of application. We used to say legal sufficiency, now you say whether the proposed may be submitted to the voters by initiative referendum, whether it is appropriate for that vehicle. And then
Partly to make clear that we are not supposed to be assessing whether it is generally lawful. We're supposed to be doing this narrow pre-election review.
And I thought the case laws had established, so I mean, it's very differential. It just says not a good idea, not whether it's a good idea, not whether even it's constitutional. It's just whether it is appropriate for that vehicle. And wasn't there some that said, or is so obviously unconstitutional that it's not worth anybody's time?
Right, that's a case law development. There was one where I think that came out of the case where the initiative would have had Alaska secede from the union.
Yeah.
And they said, sorry, that was plainly unconstitutional.
Another try in California for that.
And you didn't bring that in, or I didn't see it.
Well, not expressly. So we're saying now whether it can go to the voters, and what we have said is that it has to, on page 3, now it's just little a, little b, and little c, meet constitutional, charter, and other legal requirements. So that is now an other legal requirement that the court has said if it is clearly unconstitutional, that one shouldn't go. Single subject rule has always been an additional requirement on us, and it is a requirement on most municipalities through Title 29. And then the last is just to give folks a heads up that they can do an advisory only item if they want, but they have to make it clear.
Okay.
Is that all, sir?
Yes, sir.
None, Russia.
So this is a question, I think it's similar to what Eric just asked. So we just recently had a case where petitioners came in with a spending limit. You did the legal review, determined that it could go to the voters, and then we lost the lawsuit where it was determined to be either unconstitutional or counter to the charter, or both. Okay. Would this rewrite, had you been following the guidance in this rewrite, would it have changed your determination? No.
No. We did exactly what we would do under this rewrite, as we did under the current code. What we would have avoided is the form of the lawsuit as it ultimately evolved was not just that we violated the state constitution and the municipal charter, but also that we had violated numerous provisions of this code section because we had done things like say, your proposal characterizes this as a tighter spending limit, but there are no spending limits in the charter, so you shouldn't say tighter because that's going to mislead people and that will open us up to legal challenges that ultimately prevail at the So we said, strike the word title, and they said, that is beyond the authority of the clerk's office and the municipal attorney's office to advise or to require, and then we had provided it back to them and said, if you're okay with these changes, run with this petition master form and go with it. And
I'm
they
sorry,
were
Bill,
okay with it.
I'm losing track of who they is on this question.
The
They,
sponsors.
okay, not the people who was bringing forward the lawsuit to stop it.
The folks bringing the lawsuit to stop it said that we were without power to advise the sponsors to remove the word tighter, and that we were, the sponsors were without the ability to petition, to accept our changes, all of which is sort of madness and process for no upshot. So what we're saying more clearly here is when the sponsors walk in the door with a charter change, they're not monkeying with the language of their charter change, we can help them write a petition that's going to have a new full summary and it's not going to get us.
Thank you.
Another question for some members. Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So they, when we rejected their petition, we didn't reject it?
No, they were gathering signatures.
They were gathered.
Right, and the court basically stopped them in the middle of signature gathering.
Because I had heard that they were upset because they thought they got thrown out on the technicality or something.
You may be conflating, there were actually two. The spending limit one, we said it was a very close legal question. We were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. The court said it should have gone the other way. The other was the Protect Our Privacy initiative, which we said couldn't go forward to voters under the single subject rule. I heard in some of the press that folks thought that was a technicality, though I would say that it's not a technicality at all. The single subject rule is required at the legislative level, state level, and for all municipalities because it really means you have to present clean questions to folks that aren't log-rolling questions or that important details don't get lost in the larger section.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
the one thing that I would address with both Mr. Peterson and Mr. Dunbar's question, as Mr. Falsey was saying, one petition was presented to us with the title, Protect Our Privacy. The other one was presented with the title, Tighter Spending Limit. And the problem is both of those titles are not neutral. And it puts the clerk's office in an awkward position that we're presenting something on a ballot to voters that's not neutral. So what Mr. Falsey did in drafting this is eliminated the ability of sponsors to draft the title, because as he said, the clerk's office and the municipal attorney are the ones that prepare titles on ballot propositions. So that has been clarified, that the summary and the question and the title are prepared by the clerk's office and the municipal attorney's office.
Great, thank you.
We've learned our lessons.
There was one initiative they wanted to bring forward that said, do the legal actions of the anchorage assembly. And that's not exactly neutral. Anyway.
I should, in full candor, say there is one other change which is a deviation from the status quo. We hope the Assembly will fight on. But right now,
Which page line?
Was that page? I'm going to find it actually. I think it is page 3, the new section B. The current law gives us 10 days to review the legal sufficiency of these items, and they are unpredictable bombs that go off in our workflow, and we've made that 10-day deadline with heroic late-night efforts. Most of the time, there's been a few times where we've not actually hit that 10-day deadline. Here we have suggested making it 30 days, although we would still aim to provide it in chapter in full disclosure. I think that is the only substantive change which folks might have some substantive objection to. The rest of it, I think, is just clarifying.
Mr. Dunbar has a question, sir.
So, because you brought it up, I know there was some controversy with the taxi folks this time about hitting deadlines, publishing, and they waited until the last minute to turn in their signatures. So there wasn't enough time to do some kind of notice. Does this all ring a bell, and is that addressed by this?
I am aware of what you're speaking. It rings many bells. I don't believe any of that is addressed in this ordinance, and I'm happy to give you more information about that if you like. But suffice to say, I think we are well within our bounds to present it to this election day.
Okay, and that is, those timelines come from the charter, is that the issue?
No.
Or they come from a different part of the code?
No, the charter creates one set of timelines, two sets of timelines. One timeline for a certified initiative, one timeline for a certified referendum. That's not the issue here. There are a second set of timelines in Title 28 about how we actually run the elections. And there are some notice requirements that you have to publish, sometimes in the newspaper, sometimes not, notice of elections according to various timelines. So the first 45-day notice published in the newspaper did not say that the taxi referendum was going to be on the election, because it was not yet. We sent in that notice before it had walked in the door. But we did publish it online within the 45 days, and then we published a supplemental notice. There was an article in the newspaper all about the item moving on to the April ballot. We have a secondary notice, and I don't think anyone will be surprised if it shows up.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the members? Save in, let's move on then.
All right. So the last item before you is an unnumbered ordinance. It has draft all over it, and that is because I wrote it. And so I would like your indulgence. I am not Julia Tuckett, nor am I Bill Falsey. This is a compilation of proposed edits from assembly members and a committee meeting that was held last summer, a drafting committee that I didn't attend. So I'm going to report to you what's going on. On just some highlights. Page 1, we are deleting the term the 4 divisions of the clerk's office and reorganizing the section on the clerk's office, because we don't have 4 divisions in the clerk's office. On pages 2 and 3, we're just reorganizing the duties section. The duties are all the same or similar, except On page 3, line 27 through 29, this one says that the clerk's office assists the individual assembly members with constituent inquiries. And obviously, that one caused me a little bit of panic. And so I'm asking if we could add the language "to the extent possible" and not addressed by the assembly member legislative aides. And then on page 4, I just would like to point out that in line B, the committee meeting, the notes that I received say that it was imperative that staff of all divisions of the assembly department. And I'm just pointing that out to you because this section really does have to do with the clerk's office. And the new section that Julia Tucker did on Assembly Council and the section on the Ombudsman both have provisions regarding political activities for each of their divisions. So it seems that this might be an error, but I wanted to point that out too. That's the way the committee requested it. On page 5, I would like to point out to you that this is some clarifications about elections. And I have a committee report on line C that the committee recommended that the municipal clerk shall administer the assembly organizational election. I think that's a big change. Usually it's been the prior chair, but I would like to make sure that you're aware of that and that is how you want to proceed. On page 6, I'm at lines 25 through 28. I have highlighted that. Unfortunately, I didn't do color because we're trying to save money. But I do have a question about the starting time for the assembly meetings. There's been some discussion, should the meeting start at 6? I think that oftentimes you start at 5 and you end up at your last meeting, you took over a 25-minute break because you finished the consent agenda at 5:25. So that is a question for you, and I would appreciate any recommendations or advice as we go forward on this.
Do you want questions as we go or at the end?
She has her question now, so.
Sure.
So on thank you, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. On the one you did before, I haven't gone through it, but I think you'd do fine and the clerk would do fine doing it. Who technically chairs it then? That said, who chaired it? Are you going to? You're not going to. You're not a member of Assembly. So does it change that?
You know, through the chair, I think that may answer the question. It's very clear that the chair chairs the meeting, but the clerk administers the election. So that just clarifies it for me. I just wanted to make sure, and that's the way it's always been anyway. So that might not be a change at all. I may have just misinterpreted that.
If you're administering it and the chair is whoever the chair is, so
The chairs of that
yeah.
runs it, but she can administer, she counts the votes, or whoever's the clerk.
Correct.
Counts the votes. And we used to have a secret ballot. And we changed it one time to a public ballot. I like being able to say who supported you and who didn't. And then they changed it to a private again. So believe me, if I had my way, we'd go back to public vote on it.
Well, we could do it here, right?
Oh, I can do it in here. I may be writing that.
Right.
She doesn't like it.
Well,
Okay.
through the chair, Mr. Chair, I'll just let you all know why I think that's a good idea. We have 2 people from the clerk's office that administer the election, so that we're the ones that are looking at the ballots. And I believe that the reason that the code was written that way is if you want to vote for Bill Falsey for assembly chair, but you're worried about being able to work with Julia Tucker, if you vote for Bill, and then if Julia sees that you voted for Bill, it could cause a difficulty in you working together later. I think that's why the ballot is secret.
Are we that petty?
Yes.
Yes.
Pardon?
Are we that petty?
That'll come to you.
No comments, Mr. Weddleton. That's up to you. You can
Still in
decide. But I think that's why it's there.
I was going to go back about the time of starting the meeting. Because occasionally we do get through, if there's not a lot of lines pulled, if we do get through the consent agenda early occasionally. would it be possible to put something in there that we can start the regular meeting at 5:30 or at a time that the chair chooses depending on the work?
Through the chair, I do not believe so, Mr. Peterson. The currently public hearings, appearance requests are noticed for 6:00 p.m. That's your issue that you're dealing with right now. So if you change this, then you'd be able to go on with, or you could move your public hearings or your appearance request to start at 5:30 p.m. But we're just addressing this issue. The issue was brought up, and what do you want to do with it?
Mr. Wilson, sir.
You know, another alternative is to move the speakers at the end, if they would choose to speak during that gap instead. Then Ed and Ron would have to stay for 3 hours. I mean, but now we don't have flexibility on that.
So sorry.
I've got some people who want to discuss this. Is there anything else, Mr. Wilson? I'll get back to you. Eric?
No, go ahead. Put me at the end. Yeah.
Elby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the intent in starting public hearings, I don't think, I know, but the intent in starting public hearings after 6 o'clock is to give people time to have jobs, to do whatever they do, and then get to the meeting. And I think you could change that. I mean, it's interesting to get through the consent agenda at 5:20 and, have that balance. But if we change that, I think it would inhibit folks from getting to us. And I think it would be good public policy.
The reason we changed it to where it's at now is because we used to have, on Tuesdays, work session would start at 9 in the morning. We'd go till 4. And then we start the assembly meeting. Get up here, go to the assembly chambers to start the meeting at 5. That's the reason we started at 5 o'clock. Because of all day sitting work session, then you go down there at 5 o'clock. We were kind of strange by the time we got to be school. Every week. We met 4 times a month. So, a little crazy. I mean, let me see. What we do now is change the word. But that's something about it. Mr. Dunbar?
So I guess I just want to clarify that all we're talking about potentially moving public hearing, that kind of stuff. Is any of that in code, or is any of that charter, or is it all in code? Is there anything we're restrained from doing by the charter?
Through the chair, you are not allowed to have meetings go beyond midnight. That's, I believe.
So like remnants?
Well, you can or start before 7 p.m.
Okay.
There was a time period where there was an assembly that stopped the clock at night. Mary probably was good for doing that. Every year was.
Okay.
Trying not to.
Okay.
Okay, Mr.
Barbara?
Chair, I'll keep going. We're on page 6. In paragraph B, lines 35 through 40, currently the code requires the clerk's office to personally serve you if you have a special meeting, and I'm sure you've missed most of those personal notices, but we would like to make sure that it's an electronic notice at the email that you've been assigned by the municipality. And then on page 7, all we've done is take the agenda section out, and then it goes to page 10, and we can hop over to page 10. And the only thing I'd like to point out there is at the bottom of the page, number 47 through 50, that's the regular agenda. And I think Mr. Croft asked about this when he first started, what is this? And at one time what happened was everything that was pulled from the consent agenda then ended up being renumbered and handled under the 10s. And if you look at some of the old minutes, they actually do make a little bit more sense when they're handled that way. Right now, we can't do it because of our current meeting manager system, but we'd like to leave this in for now, and then we'll see what happens when we get a new meeting manager system. And if we can use the 10s, we will. If we can't, then we might need to come back and just say reserved and get that out of the code.
I'm sorry, real quick.
Go ahead.
They used to move anything that got pulled out of 9 into 10. Now we just do everything that was agreed to on the consent and then immediately do those 9s in it.
The 9s were pulled for their discussion.
Yeah.
Do that now.
Okay, okay.
Right, so I'll explain to you why that is better to do it the other way. So we had a resolution for Black History Month. It was 9A1. So, and somebody pulled that. All right, so then when the consent agenda gets approved, the minutes are going to show 9A2, but it's not going to show 9A1, and it's going to show all of the ones that were approved, one motion. Then it goes to 10A1, Black History Month, and then it shows the motion and the vote.
Right now, or would you
No,
like?
that's the way it used to be when it pulled the stuff off of the 9As and moved them to the 10s. It makes more sense because what happens is somebody's looking at these minutes and they say, well, why is there a motion for 9A1, but there's no motions for 9A2 or 9D or whatever? It's not clear to people who don't get this that all of those other items were approved in one motion on the consent agenda. So that's why I brought it up, and we'll talk to you about it again.
Okay.
All right? So now I am going to move on to page 13. And this addresses audience participation, which Mr. Weddleton brought up. I'm at lines 22 through 27. I think that there's been in the past that the Assembly has made a determination that people cannot testify on audience participation regarding matters that were on the agenda, but that is not what the code says.
Well, that's the way we've always operated for the last some odd years.
Mr. Trainee is correct, that is the way you've operated, and so this little clarification here, it says that a person can not testify on public hearing items. And in my opinion, that makes sense because what you don't want to have is people that think they can get 2 bites at the apple, or somebody who wasn't there on time and public hearing was closed and then thinks they can testify. I will tell you this does still allow somebody to testify on a consent agenda item that was on earlier on the agenda, which we typically haven't allowed as well. But I just wanted to point that out to you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really glad to see this because, when we do public hearings and the public hearing is closed, so for somebody to be able to come and talk about a public hearing item that is closed, it just doesn't make sense. So this is really good that it's now out of order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's going to be tough.
But it may make sense to leave it where the consent agenda item could still be that part of, I saw it was up, then you guys did some stuff on it, it wasn't voted on, there was no public hearing, but I just want to say, I don't know, I hate the gold ass saying thing, or when this comes up again you should blah. So probably the way it is right now, you can't do on anything where we had public testimony, that was your shot, but the consent agenda where we didn't, you can come and vent if you want.
Theoretically, you can come and vent then for 3 minutes.
Okay, I like that, thank you.
And keep in mind, the people we've had vent over the years has changed dramatically. In the 90s, we would have people, and one gentleman would come up from Girdwood and start really softly speaking, and towards the end, he was pounding his fist and throwing the Bible in front of us. So we've gotten rid of some of our, we used to have a baseball team. We had a ball member. It's gone. Mr. Dunbar.
It does mean, so I agree with you, Mr. Croft. I like the idea of an individual citizen being able to come and say, you didn't pull this item, but this particular contract is bogus for XYZ reason. But it does mean, because we introduce things on the consent agenda, that in theory, an organized group could sort of, is trying to filibuster, could filibuster that night, and then the night when it comes up for public hearing, right? But, and I think that's an argument for keeping the public comment at the end of the meeting, right? So if a group came and decided to do that, well, we would have already resolved our business before that, and they can keep us there until 11 if they want.
Yeah, just till 11, but yeah.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what Forrest is talking about because on our consent agenda, there are items for introduction for public hearing. And so I think we need to make it clear that, we can't talk about those items for introduction because we can't either. Thank you, Mr.
As long as
Chairman.
you've got three
Somehow.
people to say.
Well,
So Ms. Gray Jackson, if we change that to read, a person may testify on any topic, however, a person cannot testify on items for introduction or a public hearing item.
Right. Because anything for introduction is for a public hearing. Thank
We get an
you.
opportunity when it comes up for a hearing to speak on it, without introduction.
Right.
Okay, later on.
Just one more thing on that. So, you guys have been doing this a lot longer, but I have been consistently impressed with how well the Assembly, compared to legislature, which I participated in, and other bodies I've looked at, other public bodies I've been before, handles its public participation, and frankly, which is not the subject of this, but it's open meetings, which the legislature treats as a joke, and we genuinely do. How much, and it was odd at first, but how much we do of our real business in the public, not behind closed doors, and how productive that venting process is, and how well it works. So if we just that day had public testimony on it, and we opened it, and it was there, and we noticed it, and everyone had the opportunity, and then we shut it, it seems eminently fair to say later, you had your chance today, it was open today and done. The consent agenda is a mystery even to people who are relatively sophisticated. They get all worked up because it's coming. And so letting them vent about a consent agenda item, whatever happened to it, for 3 minutes versus trying to explain to them why they can't talk. I think it's almost easier to just let them talk about the consent agenda, not about a thing where we had the thing open. You opened it, we had it. If you weren't there, that's just the thing. But I think we'll almost lose more than we gain to try and say, no, I know you're concerned about it and the consent agenda, and I come, consent agenda, something happens, I'm not sure what, it gets postponed or moved or passed, and I'm there for it. I can't talk then, and I wait the whole meeting, and at the end really want to tell you about that thing, and you say, no, I know you waited or whatever, but that'll be some other time. I think even a relatively sophisticated person would be frustrated by that versus what it takes to say, okay, thank you, that'll be up on the March 21st. We heard you for a couple of minutes. It really wasn't the time, but that's okay because we'll have the whole, full, real deal, and you can come back then. What am I missing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You make a really good point, Eric. And now that I think about it, I don't think it's going to make any difference. And it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if somebody does come and they want to talk about something that's for introduction, the chair can say, thank you, and when they're done, say the public hearing is good for March 21st. And no, that's a good point. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Eric, anything else, sir?
No, thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Well, I just want to follow up on that. So items that are on the consent agenda that aren't public hearings being introduced, that they could talk on. And if it were some movie spending from one fund account to another, if they want to review about that, we could talk.
But they would have to wait till item 17, persons to be heard non-agenda item. Do that, because we couldn't stop in the middle of the meeting.
Right.
And okay, you can have a 3 minutes down in the meeting. So don't disrupt the process. Forrest?
yeah, just because I kind of got this ball rolling when I proposed that in the first place, I think, Madam Chair, you're now in agreement with Mr. Croft that we shouldn't include that, adding the items for introduction in there. And I concur too for the reasons that Eric said, but I just want to make sure that I'm understanding right. That public hearing is always at the end of the meeting, and can we pull it up to the middle? I feel like we've done that before.
Is it public hearing or person to be heard?
That's what we're talking about, the appearance request.
Audience participation.
You have people that have requested appearance to speak to us at 6 o'clock. They send that request in to the clerk. She talks to the chairman approves it. Those people can speak on whatever they want to speak for those 3 minutes at 6 o'clock.
But if
that's appearance request.
If we saw it coming down the pipe where there's this attempt to filibuster or what have you, we could just leave it at the end of the meeting. Something like this.
And we have to shut it down at a certain time anyway.
Of course, there are two things. One is the appearance request, and one is audience participation.
Oh, yeah.
And the appearance request comes at 6 o'clock, that's on your agenda. And that has to be pre-scheduled and pre-approved by the chair through the clerk's office so that we know how much time and who's going to be talking. Then at the very end, after the assembly takes care of all of its business, is the thing that we're working on now, which is the audience participation, right?
Yep.
Quite frankly, from my perspective, I don't care what they're speaking about, they got 3 minutes. They can speak on anything they want for that time period.
Except on a public hearing item.
I know, but unless
That
you...
happened that evening.
Yeah, it's just, give them their 3 minutes.
Great.
And I'll tell you, your clerk does like to get home before 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And so on appearance requests, the code does say, it's at the bottom of page 12, it's item number B, it's lines 48 through 50. It has to be jurisdictional to the assembly to grant that appearance request. And they're supposed to have tried to address their problem with the department. And so we do screen those a little bit, although it's totally up to the chair. I want to make sure that we're trying to get your business done instead of spending too much time on unnecessary appearance requests. Although it's important for the public to get to talk to you, we want to make sure that they can solve their problems. And sometimes in 3 minutes, you can't solve that problem.
Mr. Steele.
I remember back when we had all those folks bust in to testify on, what was it, income tax
No,
or tax?
that was equal rights issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they went on and on and on for poor Ernie, I think, was chair, or somebody was supposed to. Yeah, anyway, it was, I mean, it went for days.
But you could
One
have
day
said
and
that,
then
right?
a few months.
Tim, you could have structured so that only people that are anchor citizens could testify.
Well, these were, I guess.
These were not anchored, they were
You know,
mostly from the Valley revivals. We don't tell us how bad we were.
So-
There are ways you can modify
I
that.
mean, it was a huge issue.
I know. Miss Eric.
Yeah, sorry, I know we want to move on. So tell me, Mr. Chairman or
Yes.
Madam Chair of the Assembly, how do you guys see the difference between the appearance request and audience participation? That is, they're 2 different times, but
They're 2 different vehicles. The appearance requests are for things that, at least from my perspective, we can deal with. We've got jurisdiction over it. If something they need to get it to us. The people that speak on item
it's
17.
just whatever you want. Okay.
Or just whatever you want. It's Mr. whatever his name is. The second.
How can you not know his name? He says it every time. Okay.
Ed Larrabee?
Yeah, with a V like victory.
I mean, we had one guy years ago in our 4-H, we had one guy threw a bag of what turned out to be laundry detergent at us. We were worried it might have been 4-H because this guy was crazy enough to do that.
Anthrax.
So
Lucky you didn't pull out.
We've
the
had-
cheese.
Yeah, thanks.
we
That
had
helps.
one time where I was chairman, we had a guy come up with a bag. He said, "Are you the son of a bitch who wrote the drunk driving law?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" "I got something in this sack for you." And my concern was he was going to pull a gun out and start shooting. The security guards backed away.
That's all, Jeff.
So we've had that happen before. Yes, Julia, and I'll go to
Just
Ellie.
Eric, you know, as Barbara has pointed out, at the bottom, even on the bottom of page 12, those requirements under C, those are applicable to appearance requests. So, and they, you know, so you have those requirements in there. So there's a screening process, as she talked about, and those requirements aren't applied to audience participation.
Okay, good, thank you.
So at the bottom of page
Ms.
13.
Jackson, then.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Barbara, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I'll pass.
Okay, at the bottom of page 13, I just have a note, it's actually highlighted in the color version. It says the suggestion was made to include a requirement in the code to include an AM. And I did not include that, but if that is something that you would like, we need to add that language.
No.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
No. I think that an AM is really important. Okay, we've done it for years, and that's not why I think it's important, but it's the memorandum of intent. You know, you got a 90-page ordinance. It's really good to have a summary of what it's all about before you start reading the document, especially for the public. You know, it's like at the state level they do
Sponsor statements.
And it's just, I think it's really important, so I think that needs it, you know, and the administration does it. I think that we need to put something in the code that is a requirement in the same way that we have in the code, thanks to John Wood, that a summary of economic effects is required. That was the Wood amendment.
Well,
Thank you, Madam Mr. Chairman.
The Wood Amendment is the next item on your agenda, and you can see that we're taking it out.
Which number are you at?
Got wood?
We're at the bottom of page 13, number B, and we're taking the C out and moving it to a new section. That'll be on page 16. There's lots of stuff there. The next 2 pages are the C. But then I would like to point out on page 15, lines 29 through 38. These 2 subsections have been removed, and that it was suggested that they be deleted because they're not being used. I'm on page 15,
Okay.
Line
C
19
and
through-
B,
Okay, what line are we going on?
29 through
Thank you.
38.
Thank you.
So those are sponsors of ballot propositions and amendments to ordinances. You know, you don't do D at all because you do a great job on amendments, but you don't amend an ordinance at the time of introduction. That's why it was suggested to take out. On the ballot proposition one, it's not done. So that's why it was that was recommended to be deleted. At the bottom of page 15, number F, we've added the language in an assembly memorandum. Before it said a written summary, we're just clarifying that written summary is in the form of an AM.
So did 3 members may propose an amendment? Were we technically operating under ordinances needed a third?
Can I make a comment before?
No way.
Okay, I'm glad to see this taken out because I forever had an issue with it in terms of assembly members, in terms of us needing 3 to introduce an ordinance, because I never believed that was the case. I believe that if there's any changes, then we need 3. Otherwise, we only needed 1 person to introduce an ordinance. So I'm glad to see this addressed because it was confusing.
Does it address that?
No.
So let's address it. Okay, so I'm still way behind y'all, but go ahead.
No, I'm not saying that it.
Barbara, then we'll bring Eric.
Wait a minute, wait a second. Let me, may I finish?
If you want.
Thank you. I'm not saying that it changes the fact that we still need 3 to introduce an ordinance. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just glad that it's out because it's confusing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Barbara?
What I believe that the code says is that it only does take 1 to introduce an ordinance. It takes 3 to set it for public
Public
hearing.
hearing. Years ago, in their different lifetime, just for some history, there was a time period where Assemblyman Sullivan could not get a public hearing unless he had 3 votes on an issue to introduce it. And surprisingly, every time we brought something up like redistricting the school district by units, rather than at large, he couldn't count past 2. He got very upset about that. It happened multiple times to him. I was chairman at that time. It worked out well.
I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so well, I just want to understand what is and what we're doing. So this D says from lines 35 to 38, any 3 assembly members may propose amendments to the ordinance. So before, 1 introduced it, and amending it took 3?
So through the chair, I think the charter says anybody can put it on the agenda.
Mr. Chair.
It's not going to go forward and have a public hearing unless 3 people set it for a public hearing, and that's fixed, that's stuck. What this section said is if 3 people have set it up for introduction and put it for a public hearing, somebody else, along with 2 of their buddies, could propose an amendment right at the very, very beginning, and that would be publicly noticed too with the public hearing notice. So 3 members over here may say, I want to redistrict the school district into 11 different districts, and you and 2 of your buddies might say, actually, that is not a good idea, but I am going to solicit comments on whether we should have 5 2-member districts and 1 1-member district. And so the public notice for the hearing would say there are actually 2 concepts up in the air. Taking this out just removes a procedure that, as far as I'm aware, has never actually ever been used, and it wouldn't preclude anybody from from asking the clerk's office to publish them, to put the proposed amendment out to the public notice either, so.
Mr. Gates. Dean?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that Charter Section 10.01B has a requirement for introduction by one assembly member for an ordinance, but following that, 3 to approve before it's published and the public hearing set. So it should just keep in mind we need to comply with that charter provision. Thank you.
I guess I'll add, if I can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The one thing that this does allow is for more public process on immediate amendment. Because right now, of course, you set ordinances for public hearings. You may have a pretty substantive amendment that no one may have ever seen, may have never known to testify. One that you're coming down the pike where you knew it was a really meaty amendment that you wanted people to be opining on.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to suggest that the practice that the Assembly uses is that if we had 3 people introduce the ordinance that Bill's talking about, the school district, that would be introduced, publicly noticed. But if the 3 competing members, I think they would just be submitting a competing ordinance and you'd have both of them introduced. I think that's what your practice is. I think that would make more sense to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the way it works right now, we have a consent agenda, okay? And the only time we ask a first, second, and third is if we pull something off of the consent agenda. Because if we don't pull it off, the 3, we got 11 introducing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I'm going to limit my comment to follow on from what Bill Falsey said about this, and D is specific to just amendments. So there are times when, as he pointed out, where you have an ordinance that's in front of the Assembly, and it may be important for the amendment to have the same public notice and not have to be introduced as a separate ordinance that'll be 2 weeks behind the ordinance that's being introduced. So it's not something that does come up very often, but I can think of examples just in more recent history with things involving AO 37 and setting election dates and things like that, where it would be important, I think, to be able to request that the clerk publish an amendment along with the publication of the ordinance. And the practice now is that you don't publish floor amendments with the agenda. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So this is sort of an extraordinary process that would allow the clerk's office to do that if there was call for it.
Eric?
Next stupid question, I lost track, but next cross stupid question. So Mr. Chairman, it's always taken, so introducing is the one, but it's always taken 3 on the consent agenda to move it to public testimony?
Yes.
And where's that? I know it's charter, but where's that in our?
Charter 10. It's not in the code.
It's only in the
It's in the charter.
That's what Dean said. 10.01.2.
Professors, we always ask for a second, third.
Third, no.
When it's pulled off the consent agenda.
Let's pull off.
Because the consent agenda goes in by unanimous consent, so you got 11 people already there.
So don't we want to say, I'll in mine and there's other coming up, but don't we want to say that, even though it's already in our Constitution in effect, don't we want to say it here? A section that says it takes 3 to move it forward. And as you said, Elby, normally that's because you got 11, because it's part of the consent agenda and it's just moving along.
Barbara?
I'm not going to address Mr. Croft's question. I'll leave that up to you. One of the things that I'll address about Julia is she says that this is unusual, and my request, as you know, for the clerk to have to do this, and we've done it elsewhere, and I'm not sure if we've gotten to it yet or not, but if you want to propose amendments to an ordinance at the time of introduction, that's going to be published, it has to be in writing. I can't,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
that's the problem for us with this. So if you want to go forward with this, we need to add the
It's gotta
language
be in
in
writing.
writing.
We'll just add it, yeah.
There's too much chicken scratching going on.
So we'll come back to that one, all right? The next thing that I want to point out to you is going to be at the top of page 16. We're talking about the C. There's no changes to the C, except we've added the headings in there so that it's a little bit easier to use and understand what's going on. I think we've also, Rose Foley reviewed this, and she asked us to clarify, and we emphasized number B, when it's not required, and that's if it's less than 30,000. And then I'm on to page 18. We're talking about voting and conduct of public hearings and voting, and we're just kind of clarifying
Which line
some.
are you on?
I'm on page 18. It's just clarifying everything. Now, number G at the bottom, we're taking out 38 through 42, but that's already required in the code. So it's just unnecessary here.
It's great, Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barbara,
Yes,
page 18, line 38, 42.
yes.
Isn't that something that came about when we had that public committee?
It did, Ms. Gray Jackson, and this section is from the Citizens Task Force, but the clerk's office, if you have a special meeting or a public hearing, I have a duty under the code already to publish the location of your meeting. That's already in the code. It's not necessary here.
Okay, and what about the other items that are taken out?
The other ones upstairs, up on the top there, well, that has that the sign-up list is mandatory when there's a written request from a member of the public. And I have to tell you, that worries me.
Where's me?
It hasn't happened. The clerk's office is pretty good at managing a sign-up, but all of those of you who have sat through a sign-up, it is not very efficient. The chair is much more efficient than a sign-up list. So I would encourage you to change that to allow it to be permissive if we need to. I don't think you want to be in the position, and that's what I'm suggesting by deleting the last language. I don't think you want to be in the position of, telling the public that you're going to deny their mandatory request to me to have a sign-up sheet. So I'm just suggesting that if the public wants it, that you make it permissive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I could see number 2, Fred there, Mike says find everything. Start calling the clerk's office mandatory every week. We need a sign-up list on this. A sign-up list on this. It will delay the process even further. We know if a sign-up list needs to be done. And we will more than happy give them a sign-up list if we think it needs done. But not, a phone call to the clerk's office to mandate we have to get one.
When is the sign-up list? I've been through that before.
I think if you have 50 people, it's useful. Beyond that, we can structure, we have before, a lot of things, and it moves through.
Through the chair, I think you have done very well with 50 people testifying. The problem is when you've got, 300, because they can't fit in the chambers, and so then you need a sign-up list because you've got the chambers is full, and then the other people are somewhere else. So that's when a sign-up list makes sense.
The citizen group we had come together was an offshoot of Ernie's issue with the 037. And the unions, thank heavens, very particularly structured, people coming in and testifying, better than we could have done. It was done well. But towards the end, as somebody was so tired of hearing it, they shut off 210 people from testifying. So somebody shut it down, not us. We didn't win on that one. But I don't ever want to go back to that. We don't let the public speak on an issue. Yes, Julia?
I have a question on page 16 about the Cs and at the beginning, and that is that so the way that I'm reading this now is that Cs are going to be required always for every ordinance. Is that right? Well, when I came here, for every ordinance unless it fits in when not required under B. When I came, actually, it was explained to me that for administration-sponsored items, a C was required. But if the assembly was sponsoring it, there had to be a request for a C, and then that's how it operated. But I don't want to debate that. What I want to say is that assuming that a C is going to be required for every ordinance, when you come down to preparation, it has a timeline within 10 working days of the assembly request. So it's mandatory, but unless somebody puts in a request, then you're going to be waiting forever for the C. So I think that somehow that should be addressed so that it is mandatory and it happens, or somebody is responsible for the request.
Mr. Chair, I think that the issue, Julia, is that if the assembly, although it says a C is required, we don't stop taking ordinances in the clerk's office if the C isn't in there. So I think then what typically has happened as a matter of practice is that when the assembly requests the C, oh, by the way, Bill Ballsy introduced this ordinance on initiatives and petitions, Bill, where's the C? And that's usually where the request comes from. So I think we do need to make a decision about that. How does that operate? And typically it's only operated when the assembly asks where it is.
And the current wording, I think, gives wiggle room there so that assembly, neither the clerk nor the assembly members presenting AOs without a C are not in violation of code. I'm not sure that same statement that I just made would be applied here in the way that this is worded.
Okay. There is also number E on page 17, which is a waiver, so the assembly can waive the C. But I know I need to kind of rush through the rest of this.
Ms. Ray Jackson has a comment.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. The 10 working days, I think that it might be a good idea to pick out that assembly request and just made it a requirement. I mean, like if administration is required of a C, and so should we. The C is for a purpose. And I think we should take out time extension. We have a budget analyst now.
Barbara?
Through the chair, Ms. Gray Jackson, I think we could work on this and polish this up. What I'd like to make sure is happening is that if an assembly member is proposing an ordinance and we want the assembly budget analyst to prepare the C, and she's going to need information from departments, and to get that information, she's going to need time, and I think we might want to tighten that up to say that the department has 10 days to get her that information or prepare that C, or something to that effect. I mean, she can prepare it, but she's not going to have information. For example,
No, we'll figure. I'm sorry, I didn't
No,
work on
that's
it.
fine.
We'll work on it. When I'm
Yeah.
staff, I used to do the C.
Okay, great.
We'll work on that.
All right, that's
fine.
all
For
super.
a small fee, which leads to say we shouldn't be seen again. Barbara?
I think I am at page 19. This section is on your potential conflicts and voting. We've added some headings in this section to clarify it. On the top of page 20, we were asked if we could include examples of times where that supermajority is needed, and that is just very rough. We need a little bit of work in that area. And then at the bottom of page 20, this is concerning member absences, and we've moved that to the new section on page 21. I think it's much better to have your absences in a separate section. At the very bottom of the page of 21, I've included a note there. Currently, the code indicates that if you participate telephonically, it's an excused absence. But that's not the way you handle it when in our meeting manager system. If you participate telephonically, you're counted as present. And so this new section reflects that. And on the next page, page 22, at the bottom, we've just started, instead of notices, these are special notices, rezoning and ordinances forming service areas. The very last addition in B is just to, instead of referring to another section of code, it just clarifies what it is that you're required to include in that ordinance. And that is it for this draft, and I would appreciate any comments. Ms. Gray-Jackson, I believe that you and Mr. Trainee were on this Title II committee, and I'm not sure who else was on that committee.
Assembly lawyers?
Yes.
I think it was just two of us.
Okay, so I anticipate your comments might do you want their comments to go to
We'd
you
appreciate it.
or to
They
me?
can go to you.
Okay.
You and then
Copy
send it to
us.
us so we can.
And copy
Okay.
us.
Julia?
I just wanted to circle back real quick, Barbara, to the one that you brought up on page 4. Because I did attend that meeting. This is where you mentioned that the notes indicated that the Assembly Department should be included in the flip like these. And so I took that to mean that each section, each division needed to have a political activity section. So I think it is misleading here, and it also conflicts with your number 3, which says that staff is the municipal attorney staff. So I think that if you limited that to that section, and then what I did for mine is I kind of looked at what was in code now, but I also looked at what the ethics board was doing for itself on conflict, which was pretty narrow, and I was able to take out a lot of wording in the one that I did for me. So you could, not me, but for a separate counsel's office, won't be me, but and so you might look at that and see if there's some shrinkage that you could.
Barbara, what do you find this?
Well, I think that is to some degree up to the sponsors. I think that we, depending on how much time you need for comments, I think we could, my preference, unfortunately, I didn't get it done as soon as I would have liked to. I would have liked to have at least been introduced on Tuesday the 7th, so that it would get.
So about the 21st introduction.
It would have gotten married up with the other 2 ordinances, and you would have had your public hearing on all 3 on the same day. But I think if the sponsors want it to be introduced on the 21st.
So, yeah, let me just say this. Okay, this is one ordinance that I talked to Barbara about and that I want it done before I left. Okay, but at the same time, I want it done right, even if I'm gone. So we'll work together and see what we come up with in terms of introduction and see how much feedback we get from other citizens.
If the survey members can get their comments in the clerk's office, we appreciate it. We want to keep
First. So if it's introduced on the 21st, we can hear it on the 11th.
So if we got comment changes, let's get it in first. Well, Eric, anything?
No, thank you, sir.
I just want to say, if I may, just say thank you very much to the clerk and Julia and their husband and the staff for working through this title. I really appreciate all the hard work that went into it. So thank you very much.
You won't miss me, but 22:45, can you imagine, we start the day at 8 o'clock, we go to 4 o'clock, then you go to 5 o'clock, you start the Sunday meeting.
Every week.
And there was no food. Just kidding.
Oh my God!
It was Tuesday.
And there was BOA. What about that?
But it was absolutely crazy. That's the reason we moved it. Work sessions on Friday, so we get business done on Tuesday. Some people say, why do we have to meet twice a week? Work sessions Tuesday. Because there's works out better. We're not brain dead by 11 tonight.
And you no longer have to sit as the board of adjustment.
No, we don't.
Discussion, so I think it's a special section.
Tim?
Yeah, just a comment in terms of, there is an election that's taking place here in a month.
Who's
And,
running?
and so special meetings and long drawn out meetings take their toll.
Well, we're doing the best we can.
I was up all night. the other
Hey,
day.
that was the first meeting that we went to 11:15 in a lot.